Lena Parker's heart pounded in her chest as she frantically searched every room in the house, her breath quick and shallow. Her eyes darted across the living room, her mind racing with fear. But there was no sign of her daughter, Emily. "Emily, where are you?" she called out, her voice trembling. Panic set in as she moved toward the hallway, hoping to hear the familiar sounds of her daughter's wheelchair wheels. But all that echoed back was silence. Suddenly, her gaze shifted to the corner of the room, the dog cage. Her stomach dropped. There, curled up inside, was Emily, trapped, her frail form barely visible under the metal bars. The sight took Lena's breath away as she rushed to her daughter's side. The rage boiled inside her. How could someone do this? How could someone so heartless lock her disabled daughter in a cage? The camera zoomed out to reveal the culprit. Karen, the HOA board member, casually packing her suitcase, preparing for a vacation, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Lena's blood ran cold, realizing that Karen had done this. The woman she'd tried to reason with, the one who'd mocked her daughter's disability and treated them like second-class citizens, was now the one who had crossed a line no one should ever cross. The cruel indifference of Karen, so casual in her actions, made Lena's heart race with disbelief and fury. What would Lena do next? How far would she go to protect her daughter from this injustice? Lena Parker was a woman driven by love and unshakable determination. A single mother, she had dedicated every ounce of her energy to Emily, her 12-year-old daughter, who had been born with a disability that required constant care. Lena's world revolved around Emily's needs. Her every decision rooted in a desire to give her daughter a life full of love, comfort, and opportunities. Despite the challenges they faced, Lena always found a way to stay strong. She was a rock for Emily, her gentle smile and reassuring words a constant source of comfort to the girl who had already endured so much in her young life. Their bond was unbreakable, built on years of shared experiences, laughter, and quiet moments of tenderness. Lena was fiercely protective, ready to go to any length to ensure her daughter's safety and happiness. She wasn't just a mother, she was a warrior navigating a world that didn't always make room for them. Emily Parker, on the other hand, was a bright, spirited young girl with an innate sense of resilience. Despite the challenges her disability brought, she had an incredible sense of humor and a heart full of compassion. Emily wasn't defined by her disability, but by her courage, her ability to find joy in the smallest moments, and her refusal to let her condition limit her potential. She had a love for life that was contagious, and her laughter filled every room she entered. Emily's disability may have slowed her down physically, but it never held her back emotionally or mentally. She had an unyielding strength, a quiet bravery that inspired everyone around her, especially her mother. In Emily, Lena found not just a daughter, but a constant reminder of the beauty of perseverance and love. Then there was Veronica West, the HOA Karen. On the surface, she seemed to embody everything one might expect from a respectable community member, polished, well-spoken, and seemingly kind. But beneath that perfect exterior lay a woman whose true nature was far more sinister. Cold, calculating, and manipulative, Karen used her position on the HOA board to control and belittle those around her, especially those she saw as weaker or different. She took pleasure in making unreasonable demands, exerting power over others with an arrogance that left no room for compassion or understanding. It was easy to see why many people feared her. She had a way of making others feel small and insignificant, and to her, Lena and Emily were nothing more than obstacles to her idealized version of the world, a world where she could control every detail down to the last person. Lena's fight for her daughter would soon put them on a collision course with Karen, but Lena was ready. What Karen didn't know was that she had underestimated the power of a mother's love. The tension in the air was thick as Lena stood at the entrance of the community center, clutching the stack of paperwork in her hands. It was supposed to be a routine meeting with the HOA board, just a simple request for a reasonable accommodation for Emily. But as Lena stepped into the room, Her eyes met the cold, calculating gaze of Veronica West. Karen, as everyone in the neighborhood had come to call her. The woman's sharp features were set in a permanent expression of disdain, her perfectly pressed suit doing nothing to mask the cruelty lurking beneath her surface. Lena had always known that Karen would be difficult, but she didn't expect this. This level of condescension. Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, knowing this moment could set the tone for everything that followed. "I'm here to discuss a reasonable accommodation for my daughter," Lena began, her voice calm but firm, her words clear as she laid the request on the table. She was asking for permission to use the community garden's path to take Emily on her wheelchair, something the neighborhood had always allowed until now. The HOA's newly revised rules had suddenly prohibited it without any explanation. It didn't make sense, and Lena wasn't willing to back down. Karen, who sat at the head of the table, immediately sneered. "Your daughter? The one who can't walk?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Isn't it a little much to expect special treatment just because she's in a wheelchair?" Lena's stomach twisted, but she kept her composure. She had heard these kinds of comments before, but the sting of them never fully dulled. Emily deserved the same rights as everyone else in the neighborhood. "It's not special treatment," Lena responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just a basic request so that she can have access to the same spaces the rest of us enjoy. We're not asking for anything unreasonable." But Karen was having none of it. Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "Unreasonable," she scoffed. "What's unreasonable is that people like you think you can just come in here and bend the rules to suit your needs. We have rules for a reason, and the rest of us have to follow them. So, why should you be any different?" Lena's pulse quickened, her anger rising, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm asking for the same privileges that anyone else here gets," Lena said, her voice shaking slightly now. "It's not a favor, it's a right. A right for my daughter to enjoy the same amenities as the other children in this community." Karen's face turned a shade redder, and she leaned forward, her eyes piercing through Lena. "Well, I think you're being unreasonable," Karen said, her voice now laced with venom. "If you're so concerned about your daughter's access, maybe you should move somewhere that caters to your needs. Here, we have a community to maintain, and we can't just make exceptions for people who think they're entitled to more than everyone else." Lena could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she wouldn't back down. "This isn't about entitlement," Lena retorted. "It's about basic human decency." The exchange was growing more heated, and Lena could feel the eyes of the other board members on her, their gazes uncertain, some even sympathetic, but none of them spoke up. Karen, however, wasn't finished. "If you don't comply with the rules," Karen warned, her voice now chilling, "I'll make sure the fines continue. We'll put up even more restrictions. You won't be able to use any of the facilities here, and we'll make sure the community knows exactly why." Lena felt a lump form in her throat, but she refused to let Karen see her falter. "You can't just keep making life harder for us because you don't like my daughter," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly but filled with righteous anger. "You'll regret this." Karen simply shrugged, the corner of her lips curling into a smirk. "We'll see about that," she said, dismissing Lena with a wave of her hand. As Lena left the meeting, her mind was spinning with what had just happened. She had come here hoping for understanding, hoping for a fair chance. But what she had encountered was a woman bent on making her life a living hell. The fight was just beginning, and Lena knew she wasn't going to let Karen or anyone get away with this. The tension between Lena and Karen escalated quickly in the days that followed the HOA meeting. Karen, emboldened by her victory in the boardroom, began her relentless campaign to make Lena's life as difficult as possible. It started with small, petty fines, nothing significant at first, but they added up quickly. A fine for not having the proper number of trash cans on the curb, another for the unsightly placement of Emily's wheelchair ramp, and one for the flower bed that Lena had carefully tended for years, deemed out of compliance with HOA standards. Each fine felt like a personal attack, and every piece of paper that came in the mail was another reminder of Karen's power over their lives. But it didn't stop there. Karen made sure to use her position as an HOA board member to extend her influence further. She began making covert calls to other homeowners in the neighborhood, stirring up trouble where none existed. Neighbors who had once been friendly started to avoid Lena and Emily, casting wary glances as if they, too, feared being dragged into Karen's web of control. The whispers were loud enough that Lena could hear them when she passed by, their cold stares following her every move. Karen had successfully painted them as troublemakers, outsiders who didn't belong. It was as though Lena and Emily were the ones who were doing something wrong, simply by asking for basic accommodations. Karen didn't stop at social isolation, she took it a step further. The community pool, once a place where Emily enjoyed spending her summer afternoons, was suddenly off limits. Karen personally ensured that the access ramp was out of order, and the management informed Lena that no one with a wheelchair-accessible need would be allowed access until repairs were made. Repair dates were constantly postponed, with no real explanation. Lena knew it was Karen's doing. She had witnessed the woman making phone calls to the pool staff and muttering under her breath when she thought no one was listening. But Lena refused to give in. She made calls to other board members, to the management, and even tried to reach out to a few neighbors, but the message was clear. They were siding with Karen. They were all afraid of crossing her. As the weeks wore on, the pressure mounted. Lena began receiving letters from Karen, delivered in person, that outlined more violations. It felt like an unrelenting barrage, one after the other, all designed to wear her down. One letter accused Lena of disturbing the peace by hosting a small birthday party for Emily in their own backyard. Another reprimanded her for the unauthorized use of common property when Lena had briefly parked in the driveway of a neighbor's unoccupied home. The smallest things magnified, blown out of proportion by Karen's need to dominate every aspect of their lives. And each letter came with a demand for payment, a fine, a fee, or a penalty, adding to the mounting pile of bills that Lena could barely keep track of. Lena tried to remain calm, tried to be strong for Emily, but the constant pressure, the harassment, and the sense of isolation were taking their toll. Her sleep grew fitful, plagued by dreams of the HOA's endless bureaucracy, of Karen's smiling face as she imposed one punishment after another. Lena's once peaceful life was slowly disintegrating under the weight of it all. She could feel the stress building in her chest, her muscles tightening with every notice, every letter. The toll on her mental and physical health was evident. Emily, sensing her mother's distress, grew quieter, retreating into herself more often. Lena knew that her daughter was struggling to understand what was happening, but Lena could only reassure her with forced smiles and hollow words. The breaking point came one afternoon when Lena arrived home to find that Karen had placed yet another ridiculous fine on their door. This time, it was for a violation that made no sense at all. Emily's wheelchair had been left out on the front porch, a temporary necessity because Lena had been unloading groceries, but the fine claimed it was an obstruction to the sidewalk. Lena's hands trembled as she read the letter, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She had done nothing wrong, but it didn't matter. Karen was out for blood. It was as if the woman could feel Lena's resolve weakening, and she was going in for the kill. Lena couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. The fight had taken its toll on her, and she knew something had changed. She had to do something, anything, to stop Karen and make her realize that she wasn't going to be intimidated into silence. But what could one woman, with a disabled child to care for, possibly do against someone so powerful, so ruthless? The idea of a fight seemed overwhelming, yet Lena knew that if she didn't act soon, they would lose everything they had worked for. Lena sat in her dimly lit living room late one evening, the stack of HOA fines and letters piled high beside her. The weight of the day's events had drained her. Karen's latest barrage of fines, the constant isolation, the way her neighbors turned their backs. She felt like a caged animal cornered at every turn, and yet the fury inside her was building. She couldn't keep living like this, her life and her daughter's future at the mercy of a woman who thrived on control. As she skimmed through yet another letter, something caught her eye, an obscure reference to HOA bylaws that mentioned specific clauses about the rights of disabled residents and their access to common areas. The mention was vague, but it sparked something inside Lena. She wasn't sure what it was. Instinct, maybe, but it felt like a lifeline. With newfound determination, Lena threw the papers aside and grabbed her laptop. She typed in the search bar, HOA laws for disabled residents, and began to dig. Hours passed, the glow of the screen illuminating her tired face as she scoured online legal forums, HOA regulations, and articles about homeowners' rights. She pored over cases of abuse and violations, reading about homeowners who had stood up against HOA tyranny and won. As she dove deeper into the legal language, Lena felt something shift within her. There was more to this than she had realized, more than she ever expected. Then, as she was reading a legal analysis of a similar case, it hit her. Lena wasn't just an ordinary mother fighting for her daughter's rights. She was, in fact, a lawyer. It had been years since she had practiced, and life had taken her down different paths after law school, but she was a lawyer nonetheless. She had a degree in civil rights law, with a specialization in fighting against discriminatory practices, including those of homeowner associations. Her law degree had long since gathered dust in the back of her closet, her career sidetracked by the demands of being a full-time mother. But the skills, the knowledge, and the expertise were still there, buried deep beneath the surface. A smile spread across Lena's face, the first real one in weeks. The twist of fate was too perfect to ignore. She wasn't powerless. She had the tools to fight back in a way Karen couldn't anticipate. Lena sat straighter in her chair, the weight of the past months lifting off her shoulders. The woman who had been relentless in trying to tear apart her life had no idea who she was really dealing with. She opened a new document and began to take notes, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Lena knew she had a solid case, but more importantly, she knew she now had the legal training to navigate it. She began outlining her strategy, researching case law, and drafting the initial motions. The laws she'd been reading about weren't just suggestions, they were her weapons, tools she could use to dismantle Karen's power. The real kicker, Lena realized, was that she could counter the fines with her own demands, leveraging her legal knowledge to expose the HOA's practices and potentially bring them to court. And if Karen tried to silence her again, Lena would have the legal ammunition to expose her, turning the tables completely. As the hours passed and the sun began to rise, Lena felt the familiar spark of confidence she hadn't realized she'd been missing. It was no longer about begging for accommodations or dealing with Karen's petty harassment. It was about taking control of the situation, standing up not just for Emily, but for herself. She wasn't just going to let Karen walk all over them. She was going to make sure Karen faced the consequences of her actions. With renewed resolve, Lena made her first phone call the next morning, one that would set the wheels of justice in motion. She knew this was just the beginning of a long battle, but for the first time in months, Lena felt the rush of hope. She was ready to fight back, and this time, she wasn't going to lose. Lena's heart was racing as she pulled into the driveway, the familiar weight of dread settling in her stomach. Another day, another set of issues with Karen. The HOA's oppressive demands had been relentless, and today it had all come to a head. Karen had sent another threatening letter, this one accusing Lena of noncompliance with the latest set of HOA rules regarding lawn maintenance. Lena had already been fined for the same thing twice, and today she was determined to confront Karen face to face. The last straw had been Karen's smug insistence that Emily's wheelchair access was an eyesore to the community, a violation of HOA guidelines, according to her. As Lena entered the house, she was hit by an unsettling silence. The usual sounds of Emily's laughter or the faint hum of her wheelchair's wheels were missing. The kitchen light flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow across the room. Lena's mind raced, something felt off. "Emily," she called out softly, walking toward the hallway. There was no response. The sound of footsteps reached her ears, but they weren't coming from the direction of Emily's room. Instead, They came from the kitchen, where Lena's eyes were immediately drawn to the corner near the back door. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing with her arms crossed, was Karen. Her expression was cold, satisfied even as she casually observed the small dog cage in the corner of the room. But it wasn't just a dog cage, it was the kind that was used to imprison animals. It was empty except for a few stray blankets and a plastic bowl for water. Lena's eyes flicked back to Karen, confusion quickly morphing into a surge of panic. Her gaze then shifted to the empty hallway and then back to the cage. Where is she? Lena's voice shook, her body trembling with a mix of confusion and anger. Where is my daughter, Karen? Karen's lips curled into a sly smirk, her eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. Oh, she's safe, Karen replied coldly, barely masking the delight in her voice. She's exactly where she belongs. Lena took a step forward, her chest tightening. Where is she, Karen? She demanded again, her voice rising with fear and anger. The calm, controlled tone Karen had always used in their previous encounters had slipped, and now there was a twisted sense of superiority in her posture. She didn't flinch, didn't seem the slightest bit concerned with the gravity of what she'd just implied. You don't understand, do you? Karen's words came slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the power she now held. You've been breaking the rules, Lena. And this, she gestured to the cage, a chilling laugh escaping her lips. This is what happens when people like you refuse to follow the rules. I've given your daughter what she deserves. Lena's mind was spinning as her feet moved toward the hallway, her eyes scanning each room in frantic desperation. Emily? Where is she? Suddenly, Lena's eyes locked onto the door of the laundry room. The air was thick with tension as she pushed the door open. And there, sitting on the cold tile floor, in the corner of the room, was Emily. The sight of her daughter, locked in that cage, her small hands gripping the bars, shattered Lena's soul. No, Emily! Lena screamed, rushing to the cage. Emily looked up, her wide eyes filled with confusion and fear, tears streaking down her face as she sat helplessly inside the small metal prison. Lena quickly opened the cage door, pulling her daughter into her arms, her voice breaking as she whispered soothing words, trying to calm Emily down. Karen stood in the doorway, watching them with a twisted expression, as if she were witnessing some sort of victory. You should be grateful, Karen sneered, that she's not getting worse treatment. I'm only following the rules, Lena. Someone had to enforce them, and I took the responsibility. Lena's hands were shaking as she cradled Emily in her arms, fighting the overwhelming urge to lash out. You're insane, Lena managed, her voice hoarse with disbelief. What have you done? You have no right. I have every right, Karen interrupted, her voice cold and unyielding. This is my community and I enforce the rules. If you and your daughter can't comply, then you have no place here. The words hit Lena like a blow to the gut. Her rage ignited a fire she had been holding back, now pouring forth. You've crossed a line, Karen, Lena said through gritted teeth, her eyes burning with fury. You will pay for this. You don't get to dictate my life or my daughter's life anymore. This isn't over. Karen's face twisted into a cruel smirk. We'll see about that. With those words, Karen turned on her heel and walked out of the room, leaving Lena alone with Emily, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. Lena's mind was already racing with plans, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been pushed to the edge, but this time, Karen had made a fatal mistake. Lena knew she would not let this stand. She would fight back with everything she had. Karen might have thought she could break them, but she had underestimated the one thing that could never be defeated: the strength of a mother's love. The moment Lena stepped out of Karen's home, cradling Emily tightly in her arms, she knew that things were about to escalate. She couldn't sit back and let this madness continue. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was about holding someone accountable for their malicious actions. Within hours of that confrontation, Lena had contacted the local authorities and filed a formal complaint against Karen, accusing her of unlawful detention and abuse. She also reached out to a civil rights attorney who specialized in disability cases, determined to turn the legal tables in her favor. Lena's actions didn't stop there. She knew that for Karen to truly face consequences, she needed the community on her side. The next morning, Lena went public. She shared her story on social media, her words raw with emotion, but clear and resolute. She told the world what had happened to Emily, the cruel treatment they had endured at the hands of a woman with too much power and too little compassion. The post quickly went viral, spreading across local news outlets and gaining traction online. Lena's bravery inspired others to come forward with similar experiences, stories of Karen's reign of terror, her unrelenting cruelty towards anyone who dared to stand up to her. People who had once kept silent now felt emboldened to speak. As Lena's story circulated, the local media picked it up, and soon a local news station was at her doorstep, eager to interview her and air the story. The community, which had once been divided by Karen's influence, began to rally behind Lena. Neighbors who had been silent, too afraid of Karen's power, now stood with her, ready to lend their voices and support. The public backlash against Karen was swift and unforgiving. The HOA board, realizing the growing uproar, was forced to take action. They called an emergency meeting, condemning Karen's actions in an official statement and beginning the process of reviewing her position on the board. But even as the board took these steps, Karen remained unrepentant. She refused to acknowledge the gravity of her actions, dismissing the complaints as an overreaction. Her arrogance only fueled the fire as the community grew angrier and more united in their desire to see her punished. Lena, however, was not done yet. She had spent days working tirelessly with her attorney, using her legal knowledge to craft a compelling case against Karen. The law was on her side. Karen had overstepped not only ethical boundaries, but also legal ones. With her deep understanding of civil rights law, Lena knew exactly how to exploit the weaknesses in the HOA's policies and Karen's conduct. The lawsuit she filed was comprehensive, accusing Karen of multiple offenses, including harassment, emotional distress, and unlawful confinement. Lena knew the road ahead would be long, but the legal momentum was shifting in her favor. The case became a public spectacle. Karen's arrogant defense only made her more despised, while Lena's calm and determined approach won her the respect and admiration of the community. Neighbors who had once feared Karen began showing up at Lena's side, offering testimony and support. The power of the HOA board, once so unchallenged, was now undermined by the collective voice of those who had been silenced for too long. As the legal battle dragged on, the stakes grew higher. Lena knew that this wasn't just about her and Emily anymore. It was about dismantling the toxic environment that Karen had created, about ensuring that no one else would have to endure what they had. It was about taking back control for herself, her daughter, and every neighbor who had lived in fear of a bully with a badge. The momentum was on their side, and Lena wasn't going to let it slip away. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation as the case against Karen West, the HOA board member who had terrorized Lena and Emily for so long, was about to be heard. The tables had turned. What had started as a one-sided battle for control had now become a fight for justice. Lena sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on the judge as the proceedings began. The room was silent, save for the rustling of papers and the occasional shuffle of feet. But to Lena, it felt as though the world had stopped. Today was the day everything would be revealed. Karen sat across from Lena, her usual air of superiority replaced with a tight-lipped frown. She glared at Lena, but there was something different now, something vulnerable about her that hadn't been there before. Karen had always been in control, always been the one to dictate the terms of the situation. But now, she was on the defensive and Lena could see it. The arrogance that had once defined her demeanor had all but disappeared, replaced by the cold, nervous energy of a woman who knew her empire was crumbling. Lena's attorney stood up first, presenting the evidence with precision and clarity. He outlined Karen's long history of using her position of power to bully and intimidate residents who didn't fall in line. The witnesses were powerful, former neighbors, friends, and even former HOA board members all of whom had been victims of Karen's cruel tactics. One by one, they took the stand, their voices shaking with emotion as they recounted their own painful encounters with Karen. One woman spoke of how Karen had fined her for something as trivial as planting flowers in her front yard. Another man told the court how Karen had tried to have his family evicted for a noise complaint that had never actually been filed. Every testimony painted a picture of a woman who abused her power to control and belittle everyone around her. But the most damning testimony came from the former president of the HOA board, a man who had finally found the courage to speak out against Karen. He explained how Karen had manipulated the entire board, twisting their decisions to suit her agenda, all while hiding behind the guise of community welfare. She controlled the board, he said, his voice trembling with regret. We didn't know what was happening behind closed doors, but now I see it. It was all her. She made us turn a blind eye to things that were wrong, things we should have never allowed to happen. As Lena's attorney concluded his case, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Karen's once unshakable facade was crumbling piece by piece. The truth was being laid bare, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. The audience, once fearful of Karen's influence, now saw her for what she truly was, a bully who had taken advantage of her position, causing pain and suffering for everyone who dared to stand in her way. But it was Lena's turn now. She stood, her back straight, her hands steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. She had prepared for this moment her whole life. As she took the stand, her eyes locked with Karen's, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, she felt an undeniable sense of power. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the one being pushed around. She was the one in control. Lena began by recounting the events that had led to this moment, the fines, the harassment, the isolation. But as she spoke, something shifted. Her words grew stronger, more forceful. She spoke not only for herself and Emily, but for every person Karen had ever hurt. Each word was carefully chosen, each sentence a testament to the strength she had found within herself. She didn't just tell the jury what had happened to her. She made them feel it. She made them understand the depth of Karen's cruelty and the damage she had caused. When Lena reached the part about the day she found Emily locked in the dog cage, the room fell silent. She described in vivid detail the horror of discovering her daughter confined, vulnerable, and terrified. Her voice cracked as she spoke about the relief of freeing Emily from that cage, but there was no doubt in her words. Karen had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The final blow came when Lena pulled out the document, the piece of evidence that would destroy Karen's defense. It was a recording of a private conversation Karen had had with another board member where she openly admitted to intentionally targeting Lena and her daughter, using the HOA's rules to punish them for simply existing in her neighborhood. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as the recording played, and Lena saw Karen's face turn white with shock. The proof was undeniable. As the judge adjourned the session for a brief recess, Lena allowed herself a moment of quiet victory. She had done it. She had exposed Karen for who she truly was, and there was no turning back now. When the session resumed, the judge's verdict was clear. Karen was found guilty of all charges. The courtroom erupted in applause, a wave of relief and triumph sweeping through the room. Lena had won, not just for herself and Emily, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by a bully with too much power. As Lena walked out of the courtroom, Emily by her side, she couldn't help but smile. The weight of the world had lifted from her shoulders. She had fought for her daughter, for their future, and she had won. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe again. The battle had been long, but it had been worth it. The truth had come to light, and Karen had finally fallen. The courtroom was still buzzing with the aftermath of the verdict, but for Lena, the weight of the moment was only beginning to sink in. Karen had been found guilty on all charges, harassment, unlawful confinement, and emotional distress, and was now facing the consequences of her actions. The relief that Lena felt was palpable, but it was tempered with a sense of disbelief. For so long, she had fought just to survive, to protect Emily, but now justice had been served, and the woman who had tormented them for months was finally going to pay for what she had done. Within days of the verdict, Karen was arrested. The police arrived at her home early one morning, escorting her from her lavish house in handcuffs, her face twisted in anger and humiliation. It was a sight that Lena had imagined countless times in the past months, but seeing it in person, seeing Karen, who had once held so much power reduced to nothing more than a criminal, felt like a victory in itself. The news spread like wildfire through the community, and it was almost as if a weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. No longer would Karen's iron grip over the neighborhood linger. No longer would she be able to dictate who belonged and who didn't. The HOA board, once so eager to defend Karen and her actions, was now scrambling to distance itself from her. In the wake of the trial, they were forced to make significant reforms. The board members who had turned a blind eye to Karen's behavior were quickly replaced, and new leadership was put in place. People who genuinely cared about fairness and respect rather than control and intimidation. The community was being reshaped one meeting at a time. There was talk of reviewing and rewriting the HOA's bylaws to ensure that such abuses of power would never happen again. The healing process had begun, and the residents, once divided by fear, were now united in their desire for a better, safer neighborhood. As Lena and Emily walked out of the courthouse, their hands intertwined, a sense of peace washed over them. They had fought a battle, one that had consumed their lives for so long, and now they were free. There was no more fear, no more walking on eggshells, no more looking over their shoulders. For the first time in months, Lena allowed herself to smile, not just for the victory, but for the life they could now have. The future was no longer clouded by the threat of Karen or the HOA's control. They could breathe again. At home, Lena prepared a quiet dinner for herself, and Emily, the kitchen filled with the smells of comfort food, just a normal evening for the two of them. As they sat down at the table, Lena looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. Emily was smiling too, the weight of the past few months finally lifting from her small shoulders. There was no more fear in her eyes, no more worry about what the next day might bring. She was free, just as Lena was. "Mom," Emily said softly, her voice filled with a quiet joy that Lena hadn't heard in a long time. "I'm happy." Lena's throat tightened, and she reached across the table, taking Emily's hand in hers. "Me too, sweetheart," she whispered, her eyes misting over with tears of relief and love. "We're going to be okay now." The camera zoomed in on their hands clasped together, a symbol of the strength they had found in each other. In that simple moment, Lena realized that despite everything they had been through, they had come out stronger. They had won, not just in court, but in life. The fight for justice had been long, but it had been worth it. As Lena looked at Emily, she knew that nothing, no one, could ever take away the peace and happiness they had fought so hard to achieve. Outside, the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over their home. The world was finally at peace, and for Lena and Emily, that was enough. They had their lives back, and nothing could ever take that away. As Lena sat on the porch with Emily beside her, the evening sky turning shades of pink and purple, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey they had just endured. The past few months had been filled with pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now, in the quiet peace of their home, Lena felt a profound sense of gratitude. The battle they had fought against Karen and the HOA was over, but the lessons they had learned along the way would stay with them forever. Lena's voice, steady yet filled with emotion, broke the silence. "We've been through so much, sweetheart," she began, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if seeing the past play out in the colors of the sky. "At times, I didn't know if we'd make it through. It felt like the world was closing in on us, like there was no escape from the cruelty of people who only saw us as a problem, something to be controlled." She paused, her hand resting gently on Emily's, "But we did make it through, and we learned something invaluable." Lena took a deep breath, the weight of the past months settling in her chest. "The most important thing we learned," she continued, is that standing up for what's right is never easy, but it's always worth it. There will always be people who try to tear us down, who will use their power to make others feel small. But that doesn't mean we have to stay silent. That doesn't mean we have to let them win. She turned to Emily, her daughter's innocent eyes reflecting the wisdom that Lena had worked so hard to pass on. We've learned that we have a voice, and that voice is powerful. It doesn't matter who we are or where we come from. No one should ever be made to feel less than. No one should be oppressed, no matter the circumstances. Lena's voice softened, but the strength in her words remained. I've learned that love is stronger than fear. We may have been afraid, but we had each other. And when you have love, when you have someone to fight for, you'll find a strength within yourself you didn't know existed. We fought for our rights, for Emily's dignity, and for the right to live in peace. And we came out victorious because we never gave up. She paused for a moment, the sound of crickets filling the silence. What we learned, Lena said, her eyes glistening with tears of pride, is that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about fighting for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. Lena smiled down at Emily, her heart full of love and pride. And that's the greatest lesson of all. Lena faces the camera directly, her expression calm but filled with conviction. If you've been inspired by our journey, I urge you to take action. Stand up for what's right. Don't let anyone, no matter how powerful, silence you or make you feel small. Share this story with others because together we can make a difference. We've proven that one voice can start a movement, but it takes all of us to create real change. She pauses for a moment, looking deeply into the camera. If you believe in justice, in standing up for those who can't always stand up for themselves, please subscribe to this channel. There are many more stories like ours, and we need your support to keep fighting. Together, we can amplify our voices and stand strong against the forces that try to tear us down. Lena's eyes soften. Thank you for being a part of this fight. Lena and Emily sat on the porch, the cool evening air wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. The sun had just set, casting a soft, golden glow across their quiet home. For the first time in months, the weight of the world seemed to lift and they could breathe easily again. Emily rested her head on Lena's shoulder, her small hand tightly clasped in her mother's, the bond between them stronger than ever. The turmoil, the court battles, and the sleepless nights were now behind them, replaced by a peace that felt almost surreal after everything they had been through. Lena looked down at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. Emily's face was relaxed, a small, content smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She was free from the fear that had haunted her for so long. Lena had fought for this moment, fought for Emily's right to live without oppression, and now they were together, safe and at peace. This is what it's all about, Emily, Lena whispered, her voice full of quiet emotion. This is the life we fought for. A life of peace, of love, of freedom. Emily's response was simple, but it was enough. She looked up at her mother with sparkling eyes, her smile wide and full of warmth. We did it, Mom. Lena's eyes glistened with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of love, and of knowing they had made it through the hardest battle of their lives. She had protected her daughter, and together they had emerged victorious. The camera slowly zoomed in on their faces, capturing the calm joy between them as the evening sky darkened around them. It was a moment of quiet victory, one that spoke louder than words. The journey had been long, filled with pain and struggle, but they had fought with courage and strength, and in the end, they had found peace. In that stillness, the message was clear. No matter how hard the fight, no matter how powerful the adversary, family, love, and standing up for what's right would always prevail. And in that truth, there was hope, not just for Lena and Emily, but for everyone who ever feels like they're facing an impossible battle. Together, they had shown that courage could change everything, and the world was a little brighter for it.